Hello and good afternoon. It's another warm afternoon summer day in Arkansas. We may get a little rain this afternoon. I've got goats in the background and chickens running around, so they're the background audience, so you may be able to hear them as we go through this. What I want to talk to you today is a concept that I have in my book, and it is one of many concepts, and a lot of them are very simple. I understand they're very simple, but when I was doing my prophetic study and I was trying to build up a timeline and basically search for truth like we're all trying to do in prophetic study, I had set some guidelines to help me stay on track. And I have quite a few. Some of them are very simple, but they're guidelines nevertheless. Now here's a guideline that I think is very valuable, and it is when you hear it and you'll say, okay, I get it. But the thing is, if you follow this guideline that I'm going to discuss, then you'll find that it narrows your focus of prophecy. And the guideline itself is called the bounded time of prophecy. Now, what that means is, specifically to the Daniel prophecies. The Daniel prophecies are set up or described in most detail in Daniel chapter 9, and the primary verses are 24 to 27. These are probably the most studied prophetic verses in the entire Bible, and they've created enormous various interpretations from different scholars. It is a very in-depth prophecy, but let's just go right to the idea of where the bounded prophecy comes into play. And that starts with verse 24, and I'm reading from the King James. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. That's the key phrase of verse 24. Now verse 24 continues with, for that time, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness. Now these are the things that will occur during these 70 weeks of prophecy. Now, for those familiar with the term weeks, it comes from the root word Shabuah in Israel, and it just means a group of 7. Now, most of the time, and I do agree with this, most of the time the Shabuah in these groups, which is based on years, so a week of years is 7 years, or Shabuah of years is 7 years. Now you can technically say Shabuah of apples, 7 apples. And that's not the way it's used normally. You would just say 7 apples, or 7 oranges, or 7 houses. But the term weeks uses specifically, in the broadest term, 7 years per week. Now, the prophetic year, the biblical prophetic year, is a 360-day year. That's from Jewish tradition, 360 days per year. And I know that's not a solar year, that's a little bit longer. We understand that, but that is how this is calculated. So if you're going to have 7 years, you're going to have 7 times 360 days. Nevertheless, to narrow the focus here, the bounded time of prophecy. The Daniel prophecy is bound by 70 weeks. 70 weeks. So 70 times 7 times years gives you 490 total years. That's where this comes from. Now, I will address in a later video, and I think it's important to, and nobody goes this direction, but I think there is some value in here, that I found, but that the Shabua can be a group of 7 of other time frames. But that's not the topic I want to get into today. The fact is, a week is a group of 7, and the most common used time unit is the 360-day prophetic year. So why is this important? Well, one, it's important because the prophecy says this is the length of time. Okay, it doesn't say, well, that's exactly what it says. It says there's 490 years from the time of this prophecy. So for us, most Christians, when I say most, I'd say 99.9% of interpreters of prophetic verses, which is what I'm doing here. I'm not a prophet, I'm just interpreting the prophecy. And that is that we agree that 69 weeks within a day of that has already transpired. So what's left in the coming prophecy is the final 70th week, also referred to as the 70th week of Daniel, is the proper term for that. So again, why is this important? Well, it's important because we have a lot of descriptions of what goes on in that final 70th week. And so Jesus talked about it in the Gospels, and John wrote Revelation through divine delivery from Christ himself in writing the book of Revelation. So there's 1 week left. Now, bounded time of prophecy. Okay, we understand that that's bounded, but what else does that mean? That specifically what that means is that when Jesus talks about the future 70th week, or John describes the 70th week in Revelation, he's talking about the events within that 70th week. Now, I know I'm making this too simple, but the reason I bring that up is because what you will hear is a lot of Christians, and well-meaning, not to fault them, well-meaning, but what they'll do is they'll read a verse, and there'll be an earthquake in Haiti. We just had an earthquake in Haiti, and so people will, well, and I'm not saying they're entirely incorrect, but they'll go to the verse and go, well, see, the end time says there'll be a lot of earthquakes, there'll be famines, there'll be droughts, there'll be this, there'll be that. But, and that is all true. That is all true. But the problem we get into with this is that people will attribute verses to current events when we're outside of the 70th week. Hence the importance of following concept of bounded prophecy. Now, I do understand there's been tragedies of earthquakes and famines, but I don't think we're in the 70th week yet. So specifically, those earthquakes, those famines, those terrestrial disasters are going to be at a, well, for lack of a better word, biblical level of tragedy. Not to rule out the tragedy that we see going on in today's world. So that's important. And what does that do when we interpret prophecy, when we read it? We're not always looking at it as we're in it today, although sometime we will be in it that day. And, you know, I could certainly argue the point that we're getting pretty close to the opening of the 70th week. Are we there today? I don't think so. But next week I may have a different opinion. So that's the background on the importance of bounded prophecy. It narrows our focus, and it keeps us on track to where we need to be when we want to interpret what the Bible is describing that will happen in the future. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit. This is my book, and I wrote, in the beginning of the book, I have numerous, I don't remember the exact number, what I call principles that I used as I would read prophetic verses. These principles kept me on track and kept me honest and not going to conjecture. Conjecture, like we said, there's an earthquake over here, there's a famine over there. Are we in the 70th week? Well, the Bible says so. We might be, but are we? And we may not be. And that's the point. That's the real point I'm trying to make, is that biblical prophecy, the events that happen in that time, are of a higher level. They're in a specific time. And if you're outside that time, you're not, by definition, in the prophecy. This little section on bounded time of prophecy is only like a page and a fifth, and it's in big print, so it won't take me long. But I do want to read this to you, and then we'll finish up. But here it is: bounded time of prophecy. Conservative Christians agree that the 10 Commandments given to Moses do not expire; they still apply. Jesus referenced currency of the 10 Commandments in Luke chapter 18, verse 20. Nevertheless, much of the Old Testament law did not carry over with the new covenant of grace, such as animal sacrifice for atonement of sin. Like the 10 Commandments, biblical prophecy, whether from the Old or New Testament, must carry full weight of continued importance, or confusion sets in whether to incorporate or disregard. With a focus on the book of Daniel from the Old Testament concerning the future, this study regards Old Testament prophecy with equal status of freshness to that in the New Testament. Notably, the reader recognizes that the Daniel prophecy in its entirety includes significant periods of time before completion. The prediction of the Messiah the first time is just one prophecy that took a long time to complete. Yet every verse about his first arrival never weakened its accuracy. The secular world uses these long pauses between the writing of prophecy and its fulfillment as evidence that the Bible holds fault, or that God drifted away. But these pauses of prophetic completion are there by design. Bound by a set number of years, or units of time, the Daniel prophecies also include extended periods of non-prophetic time pauses before re-engaging to completion. Here this author names this principle as the bounded time of prophecy. The concept of bounded prophecy confines all described biblical prophetic events to occur within a prophetic period. That is, one is either in the bounded time of prophetic occurrence or not. However, this is not to imply that God is not involved in the lives of Christians during periods of time outside of Daniel's 70 weeks of prophecy. To apply this guideline to the Daniel prophecies when the Bible discusses prophetic events A and B, the interpreter sees both A and B as prophecy within a bounded time of prophecy, not as prophetic event B preceded by a non-bounded prophetic event A. Both events are part of the bounded time and mean that neither event leads up to a bounded time of prophetic time. The use of bounded prophecy gives the essential framework for the prophetic timelines developed within this book. Figure 1 on the next page, which I'll have up probably over here, on the next page, shows bounded time as applied to the traditional interpretation of the Daniel 9 prophecies. Observe that the figure shows the incompleteness of the traditional interpretation in that it provides no prophetic time for the destruction of Jerusalem 70 AD found in Daniel 9:26. And that is, I did discuss that in the last video about the destruction of Jerusalem as being a key element toward the timeline of Daniel. So I think you see what I'm talking about here. I hope I made it clear. And the concept of bounded time gives us great relief when we are discussing, interpreting, searching, researching the end times prophecy. By using bounded time, it narrows our focus, keeps us on track, and throws out things that we cannot attribute to the Daniel future prophecy. And that is critical. It's critical to do that, because otherwise every earthquake, every famine, every disaster can be attributed to prophecy or the future. Now, If you have any questions on this, I'll be glad to answer them. Again, thank you for watching. Have a blessed day, and I'll see you next time. Bye now.